Awesome.
That's great. So let me open our public talk officially, long anticipated. And I think the question that we put in the title is very urgent. And honestly, because I'm very concerned with access to art and with publicness. I'm not sure that's the word, but I like using it with public art and publicness of art. I really wanted to talk about that in the manner of horizontal art history, listening to more context, hearing more voices. And I have two amazing co-presenters today. That is Dmitry Suslov from UCL, who came straight from London for this talk. And this is Agnes Zani, who came from New Jersey, who is a scholar. She's got a PhD from the New School and affiliated with this institution, and also works independently as a scholar, activist, and curator. And I'm Margarita Kuleva. I'm based here. I'm a visiting assistant professor at this department of Russian and Slavic studies at NYU, where we all gathered today. So let me share my presentation at first, and I'm going to go full screen. Yeah. So I can only see my presentation, and I hope like on Zoom they can
it's right
they can see it. Oh, you can see it too. The magic of technology. Everything worked out. So the three of us gonna share the presentation, and let me just reiterate that the main question that we're gonna discuss all together actually today is that how art as a public form of creative self-expression possible in the political context where this freedom of expression is compromised. And do we mean that art is not public, it goes like completely underground, or it's private, or shall we rather try to find a new methodology on how to measure the publicness, the degree of publicness of art, and what should we see as public art in this context? So that's the program for today. As I mentioned, we have three wonderful speakers, and we are here in alphabetical order as it's supposed to happen in the public sphere in Habermas' vision. No hierarchies given. So we're going to present, I guess, 15-20 minutes each. And then I would like each of us to react to the other talks and ask each other questions. And then, with no further ado, I will open the discussion. So please collect your questions, thoughts, suspicions, doubts. We receive everything, basically. So I will start speaking, and that's the title of my short talk, Publicness, Oasis, Plural, and Dissolution of Protest in Russian Contemporary Art. And so you can find my bio online at the announcement of this talk, but I think like I would just say a few words about me thematically. As I said, I teach here, and it mostly, and by the way, at the same time we have this talk, it's also my class going on the, and some of my all of my students are here actually. That's a graduate class, and this semester I teach Soviet subcultures, which is about like forms of resistance through style in Soviet Union, and a new course called Hipster and the Ghost of Communism, how the new neoliberal creative economy meets the what we have remained from communist or socialist infrastructure. I am obsessed with publicness of art. As a scholar, artist, and curator, and I think I would extend this introduction in a dialogue with Jürgen Habermas from the famous structural transformation of the public sphere, and very famously, Habermas looks at the way of at several national cases of how public sphere was transformed and the project of enlightenment. But I think being very brief, it's important to mention that public sphere is to have all members of society engaged in critical public debate, and in this debate they should abandon their professional positions or memberships in social groups, and speak freely as citizens. And that's a very popular way to see contemporary art institutions in this manner. I think this project is very speaking in this regard. It's very beautiful and very utopic. So that was a project called Open City, Open Museum in MoCA, built by Zaha Hadid in Rome. It's the contemporary art institution. And the first project, when they got open, had no visual art at all. So it was filled with performances, people gathering. It was curated by Han Ru. And the idea was that show that this museum, the space is open to the city. It's actually La Strada as well. That's a street, and public life is there as open as it could belong to the street. And as I say, I see this project as utopic. So it never happens, like when we go to the contemporary museum, beautiful as such. There should be always financial restrictions. There are almost often there's financial restrictions, access issues, issues that concern class, language, gender, and so many other dimensions connected to diversity. So it never happens. And it's not only that all the people or all the members of public sphere can just join the museum and discuss the most urgent social problems that they need to decide as citizens. But even the workers of this museum are often invisible and can't really speak up because it can cause a conflict in this museum, or because of their structural position within the institution. So I am still a very hopeful person looking for the ways of public speech and more equity in something that concerns public art. So some of you know that I work on these issues as a scholar, but also as an artist, taking performance and public action outside the white cube and bringing it to the people in the everyday context, like in swimming pool, nail salons, and once at the national border, things like that. That's not really expected. So let's get back to our question for today. And as I said, we bring in several national cases. So I decided to look at the Russian context that I know the most. It's not a new statement that the restrictions concerning artistic expression and free speech are more and more, and screws get tied up. As you don't need to be a scholar to talk about this thing. So how it's very obvious, I would say. So how do we place this debate on the publicness of art in this context? And to answer that, I would refer to the very beginning of the split in publicness, which is I would say that we have the situation literally since the introduction of the organized system, the organized cultural policy in Stalin's time and 1932 Congress for Writers, and the beginning of fight with formalism and the Union of Artists, the Union for Writers, the Union for Composers were gradually introduced, and those artists who are not unionized were just pushed out the opportunities of creating art and the access to the means of production. So even though these restrictions were very present, there were many artists who continued their work outside the system of official art, and by the end of Second World War, the second public sphere in art was present in Soviet Union, in socialist countries too. So I'll leave the broader context to my colleagues who will talk soon. So after the collapse of Soviet Union, it seems like this split could dissolve and cease to exist too, because there was no suppression. But we can't really say that as the practices, the network structure of the underground, as well as organizational structure of official institutions remains. So if you go to, that's my favorite thing to do, if you go to HR department of a state museum in Russia, you will find positions as laborant, научный сотрудник, laborant like lab assistant or senior research fellow, which wasn't possible in MoMA, let's say so. And you will find the puppet trade union that existed in Soviet time. Sometimes you will still find the houses for senior cultural workers who, after their retirement, continue being part of the system, as well as you would go to a contemporary institution of the new type and talk to the curators who were representatives of the underground in the past. You would see how they speak about power authorities as they would be like Soviet KGB representative, how they speak about how to make an exhibition. And you can feel that those are also residual of those systems, and something that was discussed by several authors as Tusovka. I put here the definition given by Елена Здравомыслова when she wrote about a coffee shop in Leningrad called Saigon. That was an important point of a hub for underground members. And then I would state that Tusovka, which is a very informal union, we can also talk about Victor Mesianis, definition of Tusovka, which is very close, that would connect the informal social status with the actual status in the professional field of contemporary art. So Tusovka didn't disappear. Tusovka is still present, but I would state in this short time given to me that Tusovka being commercialized and became a certain lifestyle. And here I would switch to many top-down contemporary art institutions that appeared in cities of Russia. So many of them, it's not only Moscow, St. Petersburg, or Yekaterinburg, but also Nizhny Novgorod, Perm, Tyumen, etc. So those places that would, in terms of style, give more opportunities to resist to young people with certain volumes of cultural capital, sometimes presence of economic capital, but not necessarily. So this is a screen grab from my very favorite short advertisement video of Garage Museum that was reopened in the new building designed by redesigned by Rem Koolhaas from a Soviet restaurant. So Marina Abramovich, who's depicted there, advertised this place, this museum located in Moscow in Gorky Park in the very center, that as an island of contemporary art in Moscow. So why are these institutions islands? Or I would use a different concept that was mentioned many times by my interviewees in Russia. They would use oasis. So it feels like the walls, the very well-designed, expensive walls of this institution is something that would secure the right of the audience and the workers of being different, speaking different languages, wearing different clothes, and namely, I would mention women who feel more free than in regular city of like cityscape of Russia on the street. That would wear what they want. I would mention the queer community of Russia because those themes and ways of how to behave, how to dress, how to talk, they were more allowed there. And so in this way, they're indeed islands. But then I would say that since the full-scale invasion in Ukraine started in 2022, those invisible to the power or maybe ignored by power authorities territories were also attacked. And we have examples of police searches of this institution. We have examples of how curators, artists were arrested, how they were put on the foreign agents list, and so on. And the power authorities try new ways of how to define otherness by including LGBTQ in the list of terrorist organization. Well, it's quite obvious that they didn't do much research by defining the topic, but nevertheless, it's not always clear for them how to put this otherness into spotlight, but they try to do so. So if this project of island creativity, oasis creativity, fails. Does it mean that like there is nothing left? I wouldn't say so. I would say that the struggle continues, and the focus is shifted. So this slide mentioned Tворческая экономика, which is creative economy. That's a policy that was introduced in Russia in 2022, which coincided with the war. And I went through the policy documents, and quite interestingly, the policy documents a copy paste of British policy documents from the end of 90s, which is one of the most neoliberal politics, one of the most Western and exported as Western, as democratic that I can ever imagine. So here it works quite well with Hakhlama. And so the screen grab is from propaganda channel called Russia. So here, this young politician, there was beautiful women discussing what are the opportunities for creative industries, and one of them is that creative industries can go beyond sanctions against Russia because they're defined differently. So with that, you can imagine what happens to not only artists, because creative industries are not only about visual art or theater or music, they're about design, they're about making creative spaces and alternative spaces within the city. So I would say there's still places to being in a cosmopolitan city within Russia, but at the same time, they are of interest of the governmental authorities that are ready to support them and give some governmental grants, give some, they have channels of support. So I believe that's a struggle of defining creativity in the public space of Russia. And lastly, I would bring this case of the band that usually it's a street band, music band from St. Petersburg, you probably all heard of. It's called Stop Time, and they became famous because they presented on streets of St. Petersburg. They performed the songs that are forbidden in Russia and that are written by those people who are in the foreign agents list. And that's the first time when the hierarchy of the arts absolutely flipped in the public discourse, because before beautiful Naoka, who is a front woman of the band, can you ever imagine one street band that was in the news? Though they were often arrested, they were pushed out of the city center, and in the local news, there were always discussions of what's to be done with the street musicians. But then, weirdly enough, the public space in the arts that existed in reservations and this expensive contemporary art walls is back to the street. So I would just recommend us continue watching and redefine our methodology of seeing art in its publicness in Russia and other contexts. Speaking of which, I'm ready to give the floor to the next presenters, and we will continue with Dmitry Suslov to the right. I think I will just move it and switch to your, so that's an invisible arrow that but usually this control works. So I want to give a short introduction to Dmitry. He's a lecturer at University College London, a specialist in public art. He's also a co-founder and creative director of Climate Art, a public art commissioning platform focused on environmental change. Dimitri's current research and teaching explore contemporary Eastern European art through the lens of horizontal art history, a concept proposed by late Piotr Piotrowski. He's particularly interested in the artistic networks of late 1990s and early 2000s in the US and Europe, investigating how these connections bridged an East-West divide and facilitated a more pluralistic understanding of art across time and space. Welcome, Dmitry.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Margarita, and thank you all. It's a great honor to be here. Thanks for this wonderful introduction, and I think it's a bit of a cacophony of our dialogues, around art and publicness of art. But I want to sort of go back to the discussion of publicness, and to summarize what I'm about to say, I think for me, the notion of publicness in art is a disputed category, both in the East and the West, and where it remains the site of both agonistic and antagonistic debate, to use Chantal Mouss's famous distinction, although today I will maybe look at the fact that antagonistic debates are more possible within Western context. So I'm going to start maybe with a brief discussion of public art. And I think the trouble with most mainstream definitions of public art is a double myopia. The one aspect of that myopic view is concerned the notion of public space, and the other one of the public or the audience for art. Here I have, I don't know if you can see, some quotations from very different contexts, which I just wanted to share with you here. There are three definitions I took at random of what is defined as public art. The one is taken from Tate Art Term, Tate Modern, defining the notion of public art as art that refers to the art that is in the public realm, regardless of whether it is situated on public or private property, or whether it has been purchased with public or private money. So this notion of public realm, adjacent to Habermasian notion of public sphere, I suppose in its definition is a bit more all-embracing, but some other definitions here, which I'm not going to bother quote, you can all hopefully read them, merely refer to public art as art in the public spaces that is existed here from time immemorial, and usually those definitions go back to ancient Greece and places like that, and sculptural parks and so forth, and talking about how sculpture has always been there in the public realm. And in fact, my beloved definition of this three is the one from Australian Centre for Contemporary Art, and it defines public art as art in any medium that is intended specifically for exhibition within public spaces. Again, so all of those definitions, which are not at all limited to those three sources, take the notion of public space for granted. The fact that there is some sort of public space that exists is one of the main problems, I suppose, with this kind of definition. And if we think about writings on the subject, very groundbreaking in her time, cultural geographer from the UK, Doreen Macy, once observed that the notion of public space as an emptiness, as a sort of discursive void that is there to express democratic views, is deeply problematic, because it obviously ignores the fact that any public space, whether it's a big square or a tiny park, is the product of conflicting and unequal social relations. And so to talk about that, I have case study number one. So like Margarita, I'm going to talk about maybe use some historical examples and ending was kind of a more recent one. But this is an interesting intervention which I really like. In fact, last year I had the privilege of talking on a similar subject, I think, to some of the students present here. So I do apologize if some of the information that I use is already familiar to you, but hopefully repetition is the mother of all knowledge. So I don't mind sharing that again. So Ewa Partem is a legendary Polish performance artist. Obviously, Margarita talked about Marina Abramovich, known to all of you as the grandma of performance art. Well, there's also Ewa Partem, who is equally important. And in 1971, and if you know a bit of context, obviously, in Poland in the 1970s, there was a huge crisis. Communism as an idea became absolutely obsolete, whereas in the 60s it still enjoyed some support from intellectuals, etc. But both intellectually and economically, by the 1970s, it sort of didn't really fulfill any purpose whatsoever. Moreover, in the 1970s, there was a huge price hike, which led to protests, particularly in Gdańsk, the port city, and the response from government was particularly brutal. 41 or so people were killed, and thousands were injured. Over 1,000 were injured. So in that context, just briefly, Ewa Partem created this really interesting installation in the space in the square that is called Liberty Square, Plac Wolności, in the industrial city of Łódź in Poland. And this, if anyone reads Polish could see this, is basically an example of several signs. Some of them are real signs, some of them are very much unreal, but signs that govern and regulate the public space and the use and abuse of the public space. So some of the signs suggest here that smoking is forbidden and parking is not allowed. Things that you are expecting to see in any urban setting. But others were absolutely nonsensical, obviously added by the artists, including the one on the far right. It's forbidden to forbid, and everything is forbidden just behind it. So obviously, the unsuspected members of the public, and I use the air quotes for that, were obviously completely nonplussed by finding this installation in the city of Łódź. And to add to the sort of level of absurdity, the fact that the some of the signs were in fact deemed to be public property, they had to be protected by the members of militia. So not only was this rather bizarre installation happening, in which it was also guarded very, very securely by members of the police force in Poland. But I think this very interesting example from the 1970s shows in a very kind of on-the-nose kind of way the fact that the discursive void of public space is a phantasm, is not entirely possible. And I think maybe we'll remain with this slide for now. And I think, so going back to my notion of double myopia, I think another idea is that is often related to this understanding of public art is the notion of the public. And I think the most simplistic definition of public space as space that is available to all, that ignores different conflicts, but also accessibility, which Margarita talked about. We could think of, sorry, I'm going ahead, but we can think of Krzysztof Wodyczko, another fantastic Polish artist who did some interesting interventions in New York around that same time in the 1980s, particularly around homelessness. And his homelessness vehicle was the most sort of, as the artist himself defined, shocking example of utilitarianism. And utilitarianism is a key word here because a lot of definitions of public art by commission platforms and bodies to this day in the US and elsewhere define publicness of art through some sort of very futile and limited utility. If, in layman's term, if it is an artwork that could be used as a bench, it's great. The public will benefit from it. So this very depolitical and uncritical notion of public as good, as somehow seating, which, by the by, is not accessible to all, because we know that homeless people are not allowed to sleep on many benches, etc. In Paris and places like that, there are different spikes that protect public buildings. I'm not quite sure what's happening in New York, but I'm sure that they're not particularly comfy on other such utilitarian and practical devices. And so this notion of the public as somehow a pre-existing category is, I find, problematic. And another example, you know, I was thinking, since we're in New York again, I realize it's quite an old example, but nonetheless an important one. Richard Serra's work is familiar to, I'm sure, most of people here, and in fact, it's used a lot of times, you know, as public art that is in fact maybe the reverse of what the artist would himself have liked it to be, i.e. used for gentrification and urban beautification. But his famous Tilted Arc, which was here in New York very briefly, I'm sure some of you have heard of this rather brutal intervention in public space, which basically crisscrossed the square, the what's it called? I can't remember. One of the plazas in New York. I can't remember which square it was, but anyhow, something plaza. And anyway, so
as a Londoner, you allow.
But the idea was, you know, it was at that time. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the term site specificity, which today is often seen as a dirty word, as a very uncritical, as a very kind of lazy term. Anything that responds to a site in any way. I mean, co-design with a site oftentimes is seen as site-specific. So Richard Serra was very much against this in the 1980s, and he said, "I do not want to design for a space." And in fact, I have a quote here from Richard Serra, and he suggested that I am interested in sculpture which is non-utilitarian, non-functional. Any use is a misuse. And earlier in that quote, he was saying there seems to be in this country, meaning the United States, right now, especially in sculpture, a tendency to make work which attends to architecture. And the artist was not having any of that. He was not interested in it whatsoever. So the plaza became absolutely unusable, I suppose, in its way. You couldn't cross there because the sculpture was there, but this was very much a statement. And when there were solutions from the artist, and there were suggestions to remove the sculpture elsewhere, Richard Serra didn't concede. There were public hearings. The artist lost. The public won, and in fact, it was interesting. The court hearings and the presentations from the American equivalent of the council, which is a what do you call it? Like town administration, sorry,
City Hall,
were presented as a voice and the need and requirement of the public. And it was very interesting that mostly they're not really any residents here, office workers, and the will of the people in this case won.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just want to say it was Federal Plaza.
Federal Plaza.
Why is it courthouse?
Okay, right. Well, we have lawyers present, so in the auditorium. So yeah, maybe you know.
Do you have a new mayor? So we got to know.
Hurrah! Exactly. Hurrah! So great news. Anyway, so just going back to this notion that publicness or any critical intervention in public sphere is quite difficult and problematic and remains so to this day. And in fact, Margarita alluded to Jürgen Habermas's notion of public sphere, and we don't really have the time to, or maybe we'll have the time to debate and discuss it later on, but obviously despite any kind of problematic and limitations of this term, the introduction of the notion of public sphere borrowed from Habermas, particularly in the discussions of public art in the US, allowed, at least for an academic discussion of public art, to become more critical. In 1987, Craig Owens, late American art critic, during Roundtable, not unlike this one, when he was asked to define public space, he posed a question which I think remains very much present. Who is to define, manipulate, and profit from the public? And that was his question, which remains, I think, absolutely key. And related to that, an American art critic, Rosalind Deutsch, talked about the fact that the understanding of public sphere allowed to move away from this uncritical notion of public art that is somehow different from non-public art because it's located oftentimes outside. And it allows to actually think of public art differently. It allows to think of public art as is produced by public participation. And it is art that, and in fact, to quote Deutsch here, it's public art as art operating in or as public sphere. And I think this is a very critical understanding of public art, which I very much like to use in the next discussion. So two Lithuanian artists, and if any Lithuanians present, I do apologize for, I always mispronounce the last name, but there are a lot of Eastern European names today, so we're all mispronouncing them together. Gedimina and Nomeda Urbonas in Lithuania in the 1990s started this really interesting public art project, which very much was operating in and as public sphere. So just to provide you a very brief context for this, unfortunately I don't have a video for work for this, but this was one of the interventions that were happening around the modernist Soviet former cinema Lietuva, which is the Lithuanian word for Lithuania. It was named after the country. It was the biggest cinema in the Baltics, or certainly in Lithuania. And during the sort of late 90s and early 2000s, the Wild West privatization of public spaces and redevelopment of urban space of Vilnius, Lietuva was one of the last or final things to fall. And very symbolically, it was the former public space, Lithuania, which was to be redeveloped as luxury as luxury housing, not very much public, but luxury housing. And so what happened in 2005, the artists spotted the ticket hall of the cinema, and they sort of started this really interesting intervention, discussion and debate that in fact led to some of the real life consequences. How much time do I have, by the way?
Oh, 5 minutes.
5 minutes, perfect. Ample time to bore you stiff. So, the idea was that the cinema has to remain, and obviously, as you can see from my slide, it hasn't happened. So here is 2017. The cinema is still there, which was replaced by, you know, cookie cutter contemporary art museum. I mean, sorry, anyone who is an architecture aficionado, Studio Libeskind, this architect, created a solution for a cookie cutter solution for a conflict in public space. So there is a bit of a compromise. Obviously, this is not private property, although it's a privately owned museum, which to access you need to pay an entrance fee, so it's not a free museum. There are, however, and Libeskind himself defined this as a three-dimensional plaza, using this American word again, and you can find a stairwell there, so you can actually sit there. So I suppose, again, this very basic utilitarian notion of publicness is fulfilled by the museum, and it's not private property, so you can actually engage with it. Whether or not it is a happy solution, this remains to be seen. However, the intervention by Urbonas family allowed for this thing to happen, and for this not to become entirely inaccessible to any other people. And funnily enough, last time I was in Vilnius, I did see this overgrown sign for Lietuva, Lithuania, in the sort of parky bit of a museum, which I thought was quite funny. Okay, another thing I wanted to talk about, and also it's related to relating to Nomeda's and Gediminas Urbonas intervention in Vilnius, was this notion of agoraphilia, which the late Polish art historian Piotr Piotrowski introduced. And his notion of agoraphilia was the desire to go into the public sphere that was felt in the late 1990s and early 1990s across the former East, with people embracing new freedoms and moving from that agoraphobia, which he defines as a sort of mechanism of control, or, you know, using other terminology, we can talk about first or second public sphere. You know, the different approaches to this kind of understanding. But the notion was that, yes, it was halcyon days of, you know, all people embracing new ways of expression, and the public sphere finally emerging, because arguably it didn't quite exist in this form during communist times. However, interesting enough, what Piotr Piotrowski also noticed, that agoraphobia was not a relic of the communist times, but it was in fact transforming into something new. And there were new attitudes of agoraphobia that you know, were related to maybe older cards remaining in places, or maybe people retaining a similar worldview. So for instance, the artwork that I am showing here is an installation by Rafał Jakubowicz, a Polish contemporary artist, and it's called Arbeitsdisziplin, work discipline. Obviously, all the allusions are quite on the nose, so I don't need to explain those. However, what it is an actual photograph of a Volkswagen factory in a city in Poland, and when the exhibition installation in a tiny contemporary art gallery was about to take place, the management of Volkswagen company in Poland protested and demanded for the exhibition to be postponed. So it is kind of an interesting fact that, you know, even though there was the Wild West of capitalization and moving towards neoliberalism, still not all expressions were possible. And I don't know if you can see this another slide. And I thought aesthetically it's quite similar to Hans Hake's work, a much earlier work. Freedom is now simply sponsored out of Petty it's called, and there's a sign there in German, Kunst bleibt Kunst, art remains art. This is a site-specific installation in Berlin in the 1990s. This is a former watchtower in Kreuzberg, so the former deaths kind of zone where people were actually murdered for trying to move from East to West Berlin at that time. And this was obviously Hake's commentary on wild, unstoppable privatization of Berlin and different public amenities at that time. And in fact, when the wall itself became a commodity, I don't know how many fragments of the wall have been sold since it was demolished, but I think probably more. I think there's estimates that, you know, I think if you buy all those souvenir tat anywhere, you can build 500 walls with it. Anyway, do I have time to finish on this?
Yeah, I really want to talk about this.
Right, okay, well, because, yes, exactly. So, but, you know, obviously going back to the notion of going back to the Chantal Mouffe's distinction between agonistic and antagonistic distinctions. Obviously, agonism being a sort of more tamed form of antagonism that doesn't necessarily lead to the demise of the opponent. Obviously, and with my notion that publicness or public critical engagement with public sphere remains problematic anywhere. However, I mean, I suppose there are limits of how or kind of difference in degree of consequences that could be had. And this is a performance intervention by late Belarusian artist Aleš Pushkin, who died in prison only a few years ago. In 2023, the artist was arrested for his political art, and this was one of his early interventions, which was called in Belarusian "Podarunek prezydentu," a gift to the president, which is basically, he wheeled a cart of, cow's manure to the presidential palace in Minsk and stamped it with, and decorated it with the photographs of the president and some other such paraphernalia. So obviously, and there were many other interventions. For this, he was arrested. There were many other interventions in the public sphere and public spaces of Minsk, which Aleš Pushkin performed subsequently. But his final one was an exhibition in the western city of Grodno, which led to his final arrest and unfortunate demise. Unfortunately, finishing on this note, I suppose. Is a rather tough place to end, but I suppose that's what I would like to conclude with, is to suggest that obviously there are limits and degrees of expression and freedom of expression in or as public sphere, and this is something I would like to talk about with you later today. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Dima. With this, I'm moving my computer and within moving the floor to our third very anticipated speaker. This is Dr. Agnes Sani, who earned her doctorate in sociology at the New School nearby for social research in New York in 2024. Her dissertation investigates the intersection of art and activism and the dilemmas of artists striving to change in largely privately funded New York art world and larger society. Between 2007 and 2011, she was the project assistant of the Budapest-based transit.hu Contemporary Art Initiative. While a doctoral student, she was a research fellow of the Curatorial Design Research Lab at Parsons. Since 2014, she has been a member of the art collective that's a lot. How would you pronounce that?
BFA, MFA, PhD.
Okay.
BFA, MFA, PhD.
Okay, that makes sense. BFA, MFA, PhD. That's great. In 2010, she co-edited Art Always Has Its Consequences, Artist Text from Croatia, Hungary, Poland, Serbia, 1947-2009, Starbin Press. In 2022, she edited a thematic issue of Mesosphere on art activism. Currently, she works on a book based on her dissertation. Welcome, Agnes. Let's try to make it 15-20 minutes too.
Okay. Can you?
You can just go here.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So also my background is that I left Hungary in 2011. I'm still going back every now and then, but that's where I started my PhD here. So most of my experience in the art was before, but I thought that since the topic was public art and publicness of art in authoritarian regimes, I thought that I will talk about the contemporary situation in Hungary. So under Viktor Orbán's Christian nationalist authoritarian regime. So, and I will actually come to a similar conclusion. I'm giving it away right now already. About the public, like we can criticize the public space for many reasons, but there are times when it seems that public space is the only place where art can be more or less free. And I will explain to you how the Hungarian situation is different from the Russian or the Belarusian situation in that. So on one hand, just to give a context, so I will focus on after whatever you said about communism was pretty similar in Hungary as well. What we know about non-existent public space kind of becoming private, and apartment theater, apartment exhibitions, off-site cultural houses were the space where the neo-avant-garde artists could, for short term, freely exhibit things. Exhibit or create performances or concerts and things like that. But after the fall of communism in Hungary, at least until I would say between 1990 and 2010, it was a pretty open, democratic society with independent, not politically aligned art institutions. So that was kind of a time when we could learn a little bit democracy and also how the public space can be accessible and can work in a healthy way. But with the election in 2010, Viktor Orbán gained, I think even already then, maybe the majority, or maybe the first election, didn't have the majority, but he was gerrymandering the map to get the 2/3 the next time. So since then, there has been a gradual, relentless taking over of the public space, meaning the public institutions like state-funded institutions. And in Hungary, similar to, I think, Russia and probably Belarus as well, there is no other space for art than the public institutions. So we don't really have a working contemporary art or fund rich people who have money. We don't have art market, for example. For the experimental contemporary art, there is no market. Also, all the funding is really coming from state organizations. So you can see that if you are taking this away, like what the Orbán regime was doing is putting it into the constitution and constantly changing making legislative changes in order to, on one hand, put their appointees to very powerful positions, creating or elevating organizations like the Hungarian Academy of Arts, which was just a small non-profit Christian nationalist association before 2010, but suddenly at 2010, they got all the power and money to start to shape the cultural field to their liking, which was very similar, of course, aligned with the Orban government's ideas about culture. Viktor Orban even said that his goal is to use culture to shape and create this ethno-religious nationalist narrative, and so it's a or one-directional definition of culture, no pluralism. It's one way of talking about art and culture in this official public sphere. Also, there were many gradually more and more strict anti-LGBTQ legislations starting sometimes around 2014. The last one was when this year Viktor Orban decided to ban any public meeting, demonstration that has its goal as promoting LGBT rights. So, for example, this was specifically targeting the Budapest Pride. Although he said that it's banned and no one should go and participate, many people showed up. Maybe you've seen this, even New York Times is writing about it. Like some, maybe 200,000, 500,000, somewhere between those numbers, people showed up and nothing really happened. Even if he said that people will be arrested, I think at that point it was only the mayor of Budapest who was not even arrested, but called into to the police station once. The next one at Page, which was, I think, a month later, there were some, at least the police was checking some of the demonstrators. I don't know, I think maybe they were arrested, but they were also released pretty soon. So we don't have that level of control of the public space as in Russia or in Belarus. So people are not in prison or even not even really charged, or sometimes they are charged and processed, but it's not so suffocating. So that's why I'm saying public space is actually the only way where people can gather in Hungary and share ideas and use art to communicate with the larger society. There were also laws targeting NGOs, especially foreign-funded NGOs, since the government took over all the public funding sources, and they are only supporting and subsidizing either neutral or politically aligned art projects, artworks, and events. Many NGOs try to survive, in even smaller scale art organizations try to survive through foreign funding, and there are more and more strict legislations to punish that. There were also institutional changes, as I already mentioned. The MMA is the Hungarian Academy of Arts that became the singular representative of art, and they are there for every decision making. I think they have like 1/3 representation in every decision making or organization that is deciding about art. And they also took over Kunsthalle Budapest, I think in 2013, and completely aligned the programming with their very conservative values. Kunsthalle Budapest was one of the 2-3 places in Hungary that was actually the most contemporary place where more contemporary art was presented. So this was a big blow for the contemporary art scene. They also, as I mentioned already, restructured funding. They eliminated certain sources, or they made funding contingent on control over institutional leadership. So we will give you money if you accept that we will decide who the next institutional director will be. And actually this happened even without asking organizations. Some other times they offer them like, oh, you have the choice, but there is no other source than the state funding. So people or institutions were forced to make self-censor themselves oftentimes. So, and I said that they often try to put administrative into administrative positions Orban appointees, so they have full control over that from these different directions, full control over the cultural field. It doesn't work.
It's little back
like
this.
Oh,
Yeah, it's white on white, so you can't see it.
Okay. Oh, this is already done.
Yeah.
But here I'm just kind of summarizing the same thing. I think here what is interesting or new is that, as I mentioned, there are some examples when artists and organizations or institutions were actively self-censoring themselves, taking down artworks when they became too political, or not even putting them up, and it turned out that the work will be political. Not too many cases I found, but there are examples. Another way of censoring or controlling the public sphere or publicness of art is riling the general conservative public up against works. So sometimes, and I will show you an example where the censorship is coming from the public. So there is a right-wing organization that comes and takes down a small sculpture. And the government, the state doesn't even have to do anything because people are doing it for the state. Yeah, I already mentioned that. So if you look through these different angles of controlling the public, controlling art and culture and public sphere, there is no need for direct sponsorship. Sorry, censorship. Direct censorship.
There is need for sponsorship, not censorship.
But they don't have to systematically censor things because it's already decided before an event or a project or an artwork even being born, because there is no money for it, there is no subsidies, no support. So most of the artists just censor themselves before the artwork even come out. So, but on the other hand, I think that the EU membership and membership in international human rights and civic rights agreements and organizations put some limit for now on how far the authoritarian control of the public sphere and of art can go. So these will be some examples where grassroots organizations or groups use the public sphere to create a forum to discuss political things, because in most of the public institutions it's not possible anymore, at least in the big public institutions. So in the corner you can see the memorial of victims of the German occupation. Now it's called like that, but I think before it was like more like something about the Nazi invasion. The problem is that Hungary is an angel there, and the Nazi ego is taking over or try to hunt down the Hungarian angel. The problem is that the Second World War didn't really go like that. So this memorial would not make a difference between different victims, even if most of the victims in Hungary of the Second World War, Jewish, homosexual, and Roma people who were deported. And this memorial would kind of put together all that and doesn't mention that the perpetrators were the Hungarian people themselves. So for that reason, a group created the living memorial right on the day or the before even the memorial was put up. Since 2014, they have been maintaining a small line in front of the memorial where they are bringing personal objects and personal memorabilia, sometimes survivors of the Holocaust, sometimes descendants of the survivors. And for 10 years, or more now, they are doing public discussions regularly, and they are maintaining this counter memorial in order to make it impossible to inaugurate the actual memorial, and it hasn't been officially inaugurated for this reason. And the authorities don't do anything about it. The only people, again, who tried and did vandalize it were some right-wing organizations, like civic organizations, once or twice. So this is a forum, actually, where public space is used for discussions and bringing in issues, public memory, to talk about these questions in public. Another one is from the beginning, 2013, both images are from 2013, when the Kunsthalle, the first time, and it was proposed that Kunsthalle Budapest will be given to the Hungarian Academy of Art. So that was mainly contemporary art professionals, artists and teachers, students who were trying to raise awareness about it. When Ludwig Museum Budapest, another very important contemporary art institute, was kind of hijacked by the Fidesz government, Viktor Orban's government, and they changed the directorship without transparency and gave it to a woman, Julia Fabeni, who is much more aligned with the political course of the government. So for 12 days, artists and art professionals were occupying the stairs. They did get some publicity and visibility, but they didn't really have the support of a larger circle than just really the art professional intellectual circle of Budapest. Another type of way of using public space that is still working in Hungary. Another example is Pneumaserv, or the squirrels. This is a group of activists who are working through theater, like community theater, and they come up with newer and newer projects involving local residents. This is in 8th district. If anyone saw the 8th district movie, this is the famous 8th district. In an empty lot that they got from the 8th district's municipality, or district municipality, I'm not sure how to call it, but it was given to them to use, and they have created many different very playful community projects with the residents of the district and people who lived around there. They could just use the lot to play or create little parties, and here I think they are probably they were practicing for one of the performances that they were creating later. And then now they opened a new space also on the infamous Népszínház utca, which is famous for like criminal activity from the past, but they are trying to bring it back and give it back to the people by creating spaces that are inviting, and there are many projects going on there involving homeless organizations as well. So another way of using public space in Hungary when it is squeezed out or pushed out from all the public institutions is an example of contemporary art biennial that started in 2014, and they are using all kinds of public spaces to create the biennial every 2 years. This is kind of the continuation of the contemporary art scene that we had before 2010. So very international, a lot of international artists invited, and really cutting edge contemporary art. And I would argue that maybe this way, actually, it gets to more people than when it was these kind of exhibitions happened in the Ludwig Museum or the Kunsthalle Budapest. I'm not saying that that's a good change, but I'm just saying that that's the positive side of all the tragedy that happened to the art scene in Hungary, specifically in Budapest, but all contemporary art is really happening in Budapest mainly. Then you might have heard about the Free SFM movement when the University of Theatre and Film Arts in Hungary was also hijacked by the government by creating a foundation that became the manager and founder of the university. So the university autonomy was taken away from the University of Theatre and Film Arts. And since Hungarian movies are so well known in the world, and at least in the film world, there were many, there was a huge international support. If you've maybe seen photos of famous actors having Free SFR written on their hands. So what I wanted to say that I think this example, and I think that performance is one of the most beautiful example of how to use public space in a way that you also gain support from the larger society. They created this very, again, playful, but very artistic performances here. They are sending I think the founding document of the university, which includes the proclamation of the autonomy of the institution from the university to the parliament, but they do it by inviting the public and creating a 3-kilometer long living chain, or I'm not sure how to call it, living chain. So people are just touching the document and giving one person to the next person. It travels 3 kilometers like that. So everyone is touching the document. And they said, when I was interviewing them 2 years ago, they said that this type of performativity and interactivity and really inviting people to make it their cause as well and take part in a performance like this is what helped them to create a huge visibility and support. They didn't manage to save the university, but they created an alternative institution, and all the students who at the time were studying at the university were placed into other European universities to finish and get their degree, because they were all expelled or from the university when the actual change of the governance happened. So it is kind of like a bittersweet example, but I would say that this type of performances seem to be, and again, no arrests, no much response from the authorities. There was, yeah, in this case, I think there were no arrests, or and they were at some point thrown out of the university when they were trying to occupy it for several months. They did occupy it for several months, but at some point the authorities put an end to that. This is an example of censorship, but I was explaining that. So this was Peter Szalai's work called Prism. It's a 1 meter tall rainbow color 3D printed work that was supposed to stay there for 2 weeks only. Got a grant through the 9th district Budapest, some kind of open call, and there was a huge uproar against it already even before it was created. So when it was put up finally, there were people waiting to demolish it. So I think by next day, first they put up this cover, and then I think it was maybe 1 or 2 small far-right organizations. I don't even know the name. There are several, and they go all different names, but they were demolishing it right away. And by the way, the person who actively demolished it was arrested by the authorities. I don't know if anything came out of that. Another, yeah, I think I'm almost done. Maybe I go to the more interesting ones. Yeah, just one more. This is the poster exhibition that is going on every year since 2000. I think it is probably a privately or publicly, but not state funded for sure, poster exhibition. And for example, this one is an interesting one. It says this, the Real Sovereignty Protection Office, because Hungary opened the Defense of Sovereignty Office, I think earlier this year, to defend Hungary from Brussels and the EU and the liberal values. But then they say, well, this is the real, and because, you know, Hungary also officially, the government is not supporting the war in Ukraine. They try to put all kinds of obstacles every time when the EU is voting on supporting or supporting the war. So, well, I just wanted to say that independent political experimental socially engaged art is excluded from most large public art institutions. So in this case, public art becomes the most effective way to communicate with the larger society in Hungary right now. That's the situation. But of course, well, that means that it is still mainly happening in Budapest. So the audience who can communicate with is the Budapest people from Budapest, and also the audience who can see these through independent media. We still have independent media, but in small villages or outside of Budapest, many people don't really follow independent media. So much of this news really only gets to a certain part of the public. So again, public sphere is very limited in that way as well, but still the best solution for now. Okay.
Thank you. Let's support all the speakers. So we've answered the talk. Thank you so much for listening, guys. So the next part of our program would be like us asking each other questions or reactions. And I would suggest shortening this part up to 10 minutes because it would be very silly to do a public art event and not to give a word to the public. That would be a very ridiculous way to do that. So we won't go there. So I would suggest just to do one round, and each of us ask each other questions or comments in one time.
Since I was the last, can we start somewhere else?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you should start. There's a
Yeah, I wrote something down.
perfect.
Well, I mean, like, I think, like, for this part, my most interest is comparison, obviously, because there were so many cases given. And so I wrote down 3 questions. I just read all of them, and you decide what to react. So the first question was about what are alternative spaces to where, like, freedom of expression and alternative ways of doing art are still possible. And well, myself, I brought the examples of something that has a security guard. And I mean, like, that's quite funny that we can include, funny and sad that we can include the US here, because you know the situation with ICE that can just come to a university. So it feels similar to context that we're talking about, that yes, we're completely free to express our opinions and be critical the way we want, but there is a security guard helping us to be as critical as we want. So that was my vision for universities and art spaces in Russia. And my question to you was about, like, do you see any other alternative spaces? The next question was about the structure of public space in terms of the presence of government authorities. Like, how does it look? Is it one of the players dominating, or they just, like, government represents the order, so it's not really present? And I was thinking here about patriotic graffitis and how all the street artists, graffiti artists in Russia ignore them and never tag them, because, like, to tag mean to be in dialogue, but they didn't want to even, like, touch them. And the final question was about, and was inspired by the discussion that I had with my graduate students last time when we talked about experience of living Soviet youth and being a dissident young person, like representative of a subculture. And we found out that possibly there's a difference between center and periphery. And sometimes in a smaller town, more can be allowed, or it can be softer. Do you think it works for your context? So that would be my contribution.
Fantastic. Would you like to start? Or?
Well, just to the last question,
Yeah.
I can say that on one hand, yes, but again, like in our case, the problem, the visibility is really works best through Budapest. So I can see that even when some artists try to, like, or were thinking of bringing it to somewhere outside of Budapest, I think because of the visibility and how many people would attend, I think they don't really survive. It looks like to me. Although under communism that was one solution, but they didn't really strive for visibility back then. It was more like just doing their own thing between their friends and among their friends. So visibility and public wasn't the goal. So, and also in Hungary, almost every smaller city, town, village has a Fidesz mayor. I mean, a right-wing mayor. There are, like, my hometown. Yeah. Szeged is a left wing, one of the only left wing places. But otherwise, that's also not really a solution, because there will be always very diligent mayors who will try to be the best party officials or supporters, and they will ban and stuff that doesn't look politically aligned. So that's for Hungary.
Well, I personally, I find that the dichotomy East and West is not necessarily very helpful when we talk about public art and the ability to express critically in the public sphere. So I mean, obviously there are differences, and we've sort of been talking about this throughout this afternoon. But I think generally, I believe that critical expression through public art is very limited anywhere, and in fact, if we look at more established Western contexts, a lot of times what public art is doing, it's some sort of a tool for gentrification or depoliticization of public sphere. So oftentimes it's not really used for critically engaging with problems and maybe suggestions, and if it does, it's done on a very small scale. However, yes, of course, I feel that I mean, there's different examples, and obviously I've been providing examples from very different contexts, so I wouldn't be able to summarize everything just now. But I think what my research focused on in particular is the Baltic states, and I was especially interested in the search for and then I really enjoyed when you provide this counter monumental intervention with the official monuments to Nazism and victims of Nazism in Hungary. That was, I think, a very interesting example, and that reminded me of the obviously monuments are slightly different in their historical function and in their purpose. They were very much the project of the 19th century, a notion of a nation state, and this idea of embodying through marble or granite the very idea of a nation, which is a very dated idea. And I think in Lithuania was a very interesting example when I've been eyeing this falling Lenin's poster there, when one of the many Lenins fell, in yet another context in the 1990s in Vilnius, there was an attempt to replace it with something else, i.e. a very similarly vertical power radiating structure that would embody the freedom, the newfound freedom, and the monument is still not there. And I think to me this was a very interesting example of the impossibility of a monument, the impossibility of embodying that in this particular context. So, which is obviously a sign of agonistic debate between different views of the past. The ultranationalists wanted a man on a horse, of course, because that's the most original way of creating a national identity for a particular Eastern European or North European land, as Lithuania is now. Not now, as Lithuania is designated rather than East European country. But anyhow, yeah. So the invisible or the absent monument to me is an interesting metaphor for that. I'll pass on the pen to you.
Okay, all right. So, do you want to ask some questions also?
Do I want to ask some questions? Yes, I absolutely do. Although unfortunately I didn't have a pen, so I was regretting it all throughout. Now I have it, but it's too late. I think well, I think one of the questions I would like to ask, and it's maybe actually looking at the transformation in the Hungarian context. I'm interested in a sort of practical level whether the membership in the EU does not prevent from all of those changes to take place. And obviously, perhaps it's a very naive question, but I'm just wondering how this is possible.
Well, I think many people are asking the same question, like how far do you have to push to the EU to make more drastic steps? So, I mean, the most drastic steps until now were cutting the funding for Hungary, which is actually very drastic. And I think the only main reason Hungary is still in the EU is because for the money, because we get more than what we put in, even in Hungary. I mean, at least on the nominal level. So yeah, like that's kind of happened in the last 2-3 years after 12 years of growing authoritarianism. But yeah, so we don't really know how far this can be pushed and why is there why there is no harsher response from the EU. But I think our case is also a great example of how authoritarianism can exist in the EU. To study that.
Right.
Sorry, Margarita, I also have a question for you, if I may, just very briefly.
Please.
Was your case study of particularly recent example of the arrest of street musicians in St. Petersburg? And maybe actually the question you were trying to ask through this discussion is whether, in your view, there is a possibility of a critical public sphere within authoritarian contexts, and whether the example of the street musicians, which were for a time not allowed, but they had this opportunity of delivering an alternative message in the public space, very publicly, very openly, and obviously it's all been televised. What in your view are the alternatives and sort of possibilities for that sort of dissent and dissenting expression, I suppose, in those contexts?
So I would bring, as a framework, I would bring him Michel Dissertoire, and I won't be like very original doing that, I guess, but it works. So it's tactics versus a more established array of strategies. So I think stop time in the protest activity was, and then like many other groups who continue doing similar things and performing protest songs, they moved all the time within the city. They were not something established, so it's about reinventing the genre and reinventing the language. So I think like you need to be fast. So it's like a flickering protest action or like a public expression that can appear, and then it moves and it evolves and becomes something else. And I think the language is very important here. And I would compare with the US situation again, because like speaking of, so like Russian authorities know what is LGBTQI. I think they just say LGBT actually, but like they have less arms up for queer, because they have no idea what is it and how to define it. And recently I participated in another public discussion here in New York, and it was a discussion how AI can be used against those people working on the issues of diversity. And then it was a lawyer giving advice to cultural workers how to tweak the language to go against the search system. So I think you need to be fast, you need to be creative, and possibly. So I think like what I asked about going for periphery, like it's more possible on periphery. And in one of my studies of street art scene in St. Petersburg, I interviewed power authorities. I interviewed city administration representative, and it's been said that city center, imperial heritage, like it should be all clean and nice, and then Spalny Rayon, the residential district, you do like basically whatever you want. So I think that I see a possibility here also. So Agnes, do you want to ask a question, or shall we move to the audience?
I think you mostly talked about it, but I also wanted to ask whether you believe that the power is in the numbers, because at least in these Hungarian cases, more people showed up, the less power the authorities had to shut it down. They didn't really try or want it because of the visibility and the numbers. I don't know if that is the case in places where they actually arrest people, so whether people just lose energy after a while.
Well, it certainly wasn't a public art manifestation, but in Belarus in 2020 it was the nationwide protests. Obviously, for a time, even the brutal arrests were happening subsequently, but for a time there was a lull in the arrests, and I think actually the numbers was certainly, again, because the authorities didn't quite know what to do with all that many people waving nationalist flags. So yeah, I think it certainly could have that element there as well.
Beautiful. I think with that, we will give it to the public. And please raise your hands if you have a question. I see two, and I see a virtual hand of Gillian Porter. I'll give the word to Gillian. Like, can Gillian speak?
Yep, there we go.
Yeah.
Oh, you've just muted yourself again. I'm gonna ask you to unmute again, Julian. Okay, perfect.
Hello. Thank you so much. I'm coming in from the virtual public. Thank you for these presentations. I was just wondering if you could perhaps just explain what counts as public art. And I mean, I'm just not coming at it from within the field of within this field of study. So thinking about whether public art needs to take place or be present on public land, or it needs to be, or if what matters is that it reaches a broad public. So I was just wondering if, in particular, thinking about the point that public art in Hungary is mainly in Budapest. And then I'm thinking, well, what about, I mean, can there be public art on the internet, which is reaching a potentially broader public, even though it is reaching them thanks to private corporations who are giving them the service to use the internet? So just wondering if anybody could perhaps speak to this question of what exactly counts as public art in the way that you are passionate about making sure that it can continue to exist, or highlighting it as existing or struggling to do so. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Are we going to take more questions so we can answer?
I want to be able to remember it.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's go one by one, at
Okay.
least in the beginning.
So I just wanted to say that I think it's a different, like there is difference between how art historically, public art is usually defined, and here we are more talking about like art in the public, like publicness of. I was kind of responding to that definition of like publicness of art and visibility of art. So I came with activist and performance and grassroots initiatives as well that can count as art. But I think public art originally means more like artworks that were commissioned and erected in the public, and usually much more formal examples of art in the art historical, according to the art historical definition. So these were, other than maybe the poster exhibition, and maybe the poster exhibition would be probably public art because it was commissioned and created for the public. But the rest was more like grassroots art activist examples, I would say. Maybe the Black Lives Matter, the Prism small sculpture was also public art because it was commissioned and created for a public space. I don't know what you think about it.
I think it's an excellent question. Thank you so much for that. What I was trying to say in my presentation, that there's a difference. Public art is a category of practice and a category of analysis. So a lot of the definitions that are around are very limited, and this distinction between public versus non-public art is obviously quite futile, I think. I think what a lot of commissioners would tell you, and that's why they often, if you read definitions of public art, they would enlist everything that can be public art: a fountain, a bench, a sculpture. But I think, to me, and unfortunately, that's how a lot of commissioning still happens in many contexts in Europe, including in the UK, where there is a certain percentage given to art, to public art, by developers, and so that is how public art is viewed. It's completely uncritical. It's just tick box type exercise. But I feel like, for me, that definition that Rosalind Deutsch was providing back in the 90s, public art that operates in or as public sphere, that provides this opportunity and platform for debate and generates a public. I think that's a much more useful distinction, because obviously now with the digital public sphere, thinking of public art as just simply being located outdoors is quite limiting, I think.
I would just add to it, like, I quite agree with what was said by both of you. I would just add that obviously like epic and emic categories of public art, and I mean, as a practicing artist, what I see from commissioners, like looking for the opportunities, because I do public performance, like public interventions are very rarely included because they're not permanent, and I also think because they're not decorative enough versus public sculptures or like a panneau or something like that. So I would push the matter of criticality and openness of dialogue in my definition of public. And in this regard, I think like if it's an institution that requires a paid entrance, it can be still public, because let's not forget about Instagram and how many exhibits are designed for Instagram representation, and it's all part of the marketing strategies of the museum. So even though they created for being like for a paid entrance in New York, they can be seen from anywhere. And finally, I'd like to mention virtual exhibitions, that it's ongoing trend, and I know that there were several projects by Russian artists participated, devoted to, they were anti-war exhibitions, they were exhibitions focused on repressions and its memory. Yeah, and sometimes it's not easy because there can be DDoS attacks or other interventions, but this also exists alongside, as I mentioned, Instagram as a way of representation on all other social media. Thank you, Jillian. Let's get back in the room, please.
Thank you very much. I have two questions that are more open-ended. So if you would like to comment on them, please do. I'm not entirely sure how to phrase them. The first one is, I guess, the question of anonymity and how it fits within public art. I'm thinking specifically of Russian context, when after the full-scale invasion, the feminist anti-war resistant groups started posting a lot of anonymous street art, specifically in St. Petersburg. So I'm wondering, how does anonymity fit into all of that? Is it possible as a part of public art, and how sustainable it is, I guess, as a protest and also as art making? And then my second question is about the public that it is intended for. As we all sort of have an intended audience whenever we make something, but also there's this problem that in Russia, the public is a danger, as a lot of those political arrests are made because a person saw it and complained about it rather than police found them themselves. So I'm wondering, how does the public art, the protest public art, interact with danger of public? I guess that's the big question.
Well, I would start with Anne. I think it is a serious concern. And so that's actually, well, I believe they're real collaborators with the power. Like I would bring Sasha Skachelenko's case, and how she was arrested because of her public intervention in Petorechka, a grocery store, and how, in fact, she was caught because of an elderly person collaborating with the authorities. But mostly, I believe, it's not just a free will of those people who want to demonstrate their status or political capital they have by making these awful proclamations and calling for denouncement. I would say it's governmental strategy to bring some people, and they will those activists who are профессиональные доносчики, what's called, so professional collaborators denouncing like this musician, that artist, but still it's designed like a view of the people. So I believe that that's the strategy mostly. And I'll think about the first question, so maybe you guys want to contribute too.
I just wanted to say that as I was showing in the example of the rainbow color prism, Black Lives Matter small monument, the government really uses the people in Hungary as well to kind of either report on, but not even report on, to act, hopefully act upon these kinds of things. So they have been talking about this specific monument for months in social media posts, in government or in parliamentary speeches, etc., etc. So they try to again use the public to police itself instead of the state has to do it to have to do it. So I feel like there again, at least for now in Hungary, the power in the numbers thing works, because even if there was a small counter protest for the Budapest Pride demonstration, they were really just a laughable, I don't know, 40 people altogether, and the 500,000 or 200,000, or we don't exactly know the numbers, but or I don't know what the final number was making their completely peaceful demonstration made the whole thing even more ridiculous. So at least for now, that seemed to work in our context, to just show up as many people as possible. But again, that art doesn't have usually that much of a support. So
Right. So I saw several hands. I think Victor had his hand for a long time, and then Kirill and Ada.
Okay, so you identified me. Thank you.
Yes, very
I happen
much.
to come from the same city as Margarita and I, and so one question I wanted to address to two people on the panel, to Agnes and to Margarita, is the question of the individual artists, right? So we're talking about authoritarian contexts in both Hungary and Russia. We're also talking in the case of Russia about 250,000 people having fled Russia since 2022. So we're not talking about people actually creating or like doing creative stuff in Russia. Many of them are out of the country. So my question is like, what is the reaction of individual artists to the situation with the art control in the country? Right. One example I can think of, I literally know a person in the Union of the Artists of St. Petersburg who stood up during one of the committee meetings of the Union of the Artists. They said, I am against the invasion of Ukraine. He was actually, his membership was terminated as like a major artist. And I know a few other artists who are into religious art. They into iconography, and they love to like portray angels and stuff. So their artists, on the contrary, is very much in demand because they are supporting the official policy of the country to be like very religious and Christian and so on and so forth. So these guys are kind of like they are complying, right? But there are other people who are in the country, and because when we're talking about like public art, it's all like a category, and to me it's very confusing because there are so many people who are in Lithuania, in Belarus, in Hungary, in Russia, who are individual artists, and they have their own views. Those who stay in the country, what are they doing? Like, what are they thinking? That's what I was wondering.
Well, I think the answer depends. So thank you very much. It's a very important question, and it's important to talk about. So I think like what are they thinking is like, who's asking? Because like if like a friend asking at a cozy kitchen, that's one reply. If it's like a social survey asking like do you support special military operation of 5 years in prison, the answer is rather different. So there are interesting creative ways of obtaining data. I can talk for my data. And then like people are searching for strategies, and it's not so public protest, it's public performance or public act of resistance is not only the only answer. So there are a lot of ways, like some people travel and they are more open outside the country, and then they go inside the country, work again, and show their work elsewhere. So there are people like that. There are people who publicize it, but to a limited extent. To give you some numbers, speaking of numbers, in the first days of war, that was an open letter of cultural workers in Russia, and before they were targeted by police, and then all the names were concealed, they were 13,000 people, like in 2 days. So I think that's a context of a speech act or expression. Do you want to add anything?
Well, I just wanted to say that in Hungary, it's a little bit more freedom in the sense that there are still small organizations that can exhibit somewhat political works of Biennale, and then the organization where I worked before, transit.hu. But on the other hand, they are documenting, like I know artists who used all this time to document every single demonstration, like a photographer. She has a huge freely available database of all the demonstrations that she documented, some 1,000 different events, maybe that's it. Yeah, so they're just, and on the other hand, they're self-censoring as well, because they need jobs and they need maybe some type of support. But again, like much of the people that I was working with, I don't think they get much government support or subsidies or anything anymore. So they try to still work with international funding, and also surviving, like in the 50s under communism, like applied art commissions, design work, architectural consulting, and other stuff.
Exactly. So let's give it to Kirill.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I have a question. Do you think that there is some kind of demand from the people for conservative policies? But maybe the second question right now or after.
Yeah, all
Yeah,
of
so
them.
Margarita, I'm just wondering, are you aware of the debates between Yulia Galeman and Kirill Martina?
Maybe you should enlighten me more.
Well, they have.
Sorry.
Yeah, so they
Our keyboard, so sorry about that.
Kirill Martina was I think he's a journalist. He's the former editor at Nova Gazeta, and Yulia Galeman is an independent politician. She's in Russia. He's in Europe, and they have debates, and the headline, which is misleading, but I'm just wondering if you could comment on that. Are independent politicians, Nauka's arrest, are independent politicians and media responsible? So the point is that basically,
I know what you mean.
yeah. So what's your take on that? Because I think they didn't, like, it's misleading, but they partly talked about it. Like, they were seen for months, nobody paid attention. That liberals stepped in, they shared the videos about her, and then it attracted too much attention by law enforcement officers, and that's why they were arrested. So it's better not to like spread that and other.
I will quickly address this question.
Yeah. Yes. So one for you and the second one for you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be very fast addressing it. I definitely don't take this point, because I don't think it's certain order, like the most public cases are the most prosecuted ones. It doesn't work like that. There are a lot of silent arrests and invisible heroes of protest who are in prison. We have no idea about that. So I think this argument is just an attempt to silence protesters and silence the supporters. That's what I think, and I'll give it to you.
Yeah, so it turns out, now that I'm studying it more, that Hungary throughout the whole 20th century was more like a conservative leaning country, even if it's hard to believe that. But anyway, so right now, I think the majority of people are more like conservative, center conservative, but too many people are also fed up with the government and the corruption that's been going on. So, for example, when the Pride happened and so many people showed up, they were not all left-wing voters. Many people showed up saying that, well, we are not here for the LGBTQ rights, but we are here for our freedom of assembly. So it's bigger than just one issue. So actually, the Pride could get a big support from the society because of it was addressing several issues, and for that people could give up their maybe anti-LGBTQ sentiments. That it's a long story, but I think people are like the majority is a bit more conservative or very conservative.
How many questions do we have left? So we have Aiden, and
There's a
is
question
that
in the chat.
in the chat? Yeah, okay, let's give it to Aiden.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your talk. I'll try to trace my train of thought and get to my question as succinctly as I can. So I was thinking about Stop Time being the name of this public musical group as sort of an interesting, provocative choice of name, because Stop Time Jazz is where the soloist is given a bar or 2 bars of silence in which to improvise, and so the rest of the band will play like on the one every bar or 2 bars, and then there's this really interesting dialogue between the sort of metronome of the rest of the band and then the soloist. And so I was thinking of this musical performance group as that metronome, and then the space in between, the negative space in between, as what response is to whatever the public art is. And I was thinking specifically in terms of the role that censorship plays in that sort of dialogue in the Speech Act or the public art, as sort of allowing for this negative space in which there's some sort of response. And I was thinking most specifically about the recent Banksy piece of art that was sandblasted or power washed, to where it only left a shadow, but somehow that shadow was of the like judge with the gavel and the pro-Palestinian protester being sort of almost more powerful than the original piece of public art, or the example of sort of like toppled or destroyed monuments, and that negative space sort of was there, having this really sort of powerful impact. So I was wondering what role actual censorship plays, like what role that has in relationship to the public and in relationship to this sort of dialogue, if it can be considered a sort of like inadvertent dialogue, or even something that can be sort of harnessed strategically, like what that kind of imposition of negative space can do in censorship.
Thank you for this museological interpretation of stop time. So I have no idea, and I mean, like, to me, it pulls up a lot of local contacts from St. Petersburg and Leningrad past, because metronome has a special feature as as memory of the siege of Leningrad. It's one of the symbols, and the metronome
Of symbols for, sorry.
of siege, of blackout.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm just thinking, it's a question discussed a lot in relation to Pussy Riot's case, how when they actually dance in the church, nothing happened, but then when they publish it, the public response was actually part of their performance. I think it was like at least partially intended, and they talked a lot about that, as I know Peter Pawlensky did too. But I don't want to see it as a necessary element of any public act, and I would also include the support of the people. And the first slide for the entire Roundtable, it was a group of beautiful young people supporting stop time with the background of Kazansky Cathedral in the ring, 60 slides back. Yeah, Kazansky Cathedral. So they are named heroes too, and they participate too, and that's important to remember, as well as beware of censorship. I think that that's a good way to finish. Before we give the final applause to our beautiful public and my fantastic co-presenters, I just want to say that we don't want to lose you. And if you want, I would suggest gather downstairs and go have a quick drink with us if you want to. Anyway, thank you. And you too, Kirill, of course. Thank you all for coming.